The house on Maple Street was never quiet. From morning until night, music filled every room like sunlight through open windows. Piano notes danced through the hallways. The deep hum of a cello vibrated through the wooden floors. This was the world little Emily was born into, and for the first 4 years of her life, it was the only world she knew. Her mother, Catherine, was a concert pianist who had performed in some of the finest halls across the country. Her father, Robert, played cello in the city orchestra and spent his evenings practicing pieces that made the walls seem to breathe with emotion. Music was not just their profession. It was their language, their love, their way of understanding everything around them. Emily showed signs of her parents' gift almost immediately. Before she could walk, she would bounce in her crib whenever her mother played. By the time she was 2, she would sit on Catherine's lap at the piano bench, her tiny fingers pressing random keys with pure joy on her face. Her parents would look at each other and smile, knowing their daughter had inherited their passion. Every night, Robert would play a lullaby on his cello while Catherine hummed along. Emily would fall asleep with music wrapping around her like a warm blanket. Those were the golden days. The days the family would later look back on, with both gratitude and heartbreak. The winter Emily turned 4 started like any other. Christmas decorations filled the house, and Catherine was preparing for a New Year's concert at the City Theater. Emily had a small toy piano that she carried everywhere, pressing its plastic keys and giggling at the tinny sounds it made. Then came the fever. It started on a Tuesday night. Emily complained that her head hurt, and Catherine noticed her daughter felt warm. They thought it was just a common cold. Maybe the flu that was going around the neighborhood. Robert made soup while Catherine gave Emily medicine and tucked her into bed with extra blankets. But by Thursday, Emily could barely lift her head. Her fever had climbed dangerously high, and she had started vomiting. The local doctor came to the house and immediately told them to rush her to the hospital. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he packed his bag. That was when Catherine felt the first real wave of fear crash over her. The next 5 days were a blur of hospital rooms, doctors in white coats, and machines that beeped through the night. Emily had contracted bacterial meningitis, a severe infection that had spread rapidly through her small body. The doctors worked around the clock to save her life, pumping antibiotics through tubes connected to her tiny arms. Catherine and Robert took turns sleeping in the hard plastic chair beside her bed. They held her hand and whispered promises into the sterile air. They prayed to every god they could name, begging for their daughter to survive. The music that had always filled their lives fell completely silent. Neither of them could even think about playing while their child fought for her life. On the 6th day, Emily's fever finally broke. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at her mother with confusion, but recognition. Catherine burst into tears and held her daughter so tightly that Robert had to gently remind her to be careful of the tubes. She was alive. Their little girl had survived. But the celebration was short. 2 days later, the doctors ran a series of tests. They asked Emily questions and showed her pictures. They made sounds behind her head and watched for reactions that never came. Finally, the head doctor, a gray-haired man with kind but tired eyes, asked Catherine and Robert to step into his office. The words he spoke changed everything. Profound sensorineural hearing loss. Bilateral. Likely permanent. The infection had damaged the delicate nerves in Emily's inner ears. The doctors had saved her life, but they could not save her hearing. Their daughter, born into a house of music, would never hear a single note again. Catherine collapsed into Robert's arms right there in the doctor's office. Robert stared at the wall behind the doctor's head, his mind unable to process what he had just been told. This could not be real. This could not be happening to their family. The drive home was silent in a way it had never been before. Emily sat in her car seat, looking out the window with wide eyes that no longer responded to the sounds of the world passing by. She did not know yet. She was too young to fully understand that the voices of her parents, the songs of birds, the rumble of the car engine beneath her, All of it had faded into nothing. The first weeks at home were the hardest. Emily would cry and point at her ears. Frustrated by the silence, she could not escape. She would walk up to the piano and bang on the keys, then look at her mother with confusion when the expected joy did not come. The vibrations were there, but the music that had once made her dance was gone. Catherine stopped playing altogether. Every time she sat at the piano bench, she would think of her daughter and the gift that had been stolen from her. The instrument gathered dust in the living room, a painful monument to everything they had lost. Robert tried to keep practicing, thinking that maybe Emily could still feel something through the vibrations. But the emptiness in his daughter's eyes when she watched him play was too much to bear. Eventually, his cello found its way into the closet, hidden behind winter coats and forgotten boxes. The house on Maple Street grew quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a lazy afternoon, but the heavy quiet of grief. The neighbors noticed. Friends called less often, unsure of what to say. The music that had once spilled out of every window had disappeared completely. Emily began attending a special school for deaf children. She learned sign language quickly, her small hands forming words with surprising grace. Her teachers said she was bright and curious, always asking questions about the world around her. But at home, she avoided the living room where the piano sat waiting. Months passed. Catherine found Emily standing by the piano one evening, her fingers hovering just above the keys. She watched from the doorway, holding her breath. Emily's hand trembled slightly, then dropped to her side. She walked away without touching a single key. That night, Catherine cried herself to sleep for the first time in weeks. She had accepted that her daughter was deaf. She had learned sign language and adjusted their entire life around Emily's needs. But watching her child stand before the piano and turn away, that broke something inside her that she did not know how to fix. Robert suggested they sell the piano. Maybe it would be easier, he said, if they removed the constant reminder of what Emily had lost. Catherine refused. She could not explain why, but getting rid of the piano felt like giving up on something important, something she could not yet name. One rainy night in early spring, Catherine woke to a strange sensation. She felt a faint vibration through the floor, rhythmic and gentle. She walked downstairs in her nightgown, following the feeling to the living room. There was Emily, sitting on the floor beside the piano in the darkness. Her small hands were pressed flat against the wooden body of the instrument. Her eyes were closed, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. She was not trying to play. She was trying to feel. Catherine knelt beside her daughter without making a sound. She placed her own hands on the piano, feeling the faint vibrations from the street outside, from the rain against the windows, from the house settling around them. Emily opened her eyes and looked at her mother. In the dim light, Catherine saw something she had not seen in months. It was not sadness. It was not confusion. It was longing. Her daughter still wanted music. She just needed a different way to find it. Catherine did not know what would happen next. She did not have answers or solutions. But in that moment, sitting on the cold floor with her hands pressed against the piano beside her daughter, she made a silent promise. She would find a way. No matter how long it took, no matter how impossible it seemed, she would help Emily find her way back to music. The silent world was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. 3 years had passed since the illness that changed everything. Emily was now 7 years old, and she had grown into a quiet but observant child. Her world was one of silence, but her eyes missed nothing. She watched people's faces when they talked, read their emotions in the smallest movements, and understood things that most children her age could not even notice. Catherine had returned to playing piano, though not as often as before. She took on a few students to help with the family's expenses and performed occasionally at small local events. The music had come back to the house on Maple Street, but it was softer now, more careful, as if afraid to remind everyone of what had been lost. Emily would often sit in the hallway while her mother taught lessons. She could not hear the notes, but she could feel something. The wooden floors carried vibrations from the piano. tiny trembles that traveled up through her body when she sat very still. She learned to tell the difference between high notes and low notes just by how the floor shook beneath her. One evening in early autumn, Emily walked into the living room where Catherine was practicing alone. She stood by the piano for a long moment, watching her mother's fingers dance across the black and white keys. Then she did something she had not done since before her illness. She climbed onto the piano bench beside her mother. Catherine stopped playing immediately. Her heart pounded as she looked at her daughter. Afraid to hope, afraid to assume anything, Emily looked up at her with those serious brown eyes and moved her hands in the sign language they now used every day. "Teach me." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She signed back slowly, making sure Emily understood. "You want to learn piano?" Emily nodded. She placed her small hand flat on the piano's wooden surface, feeling the lingering vibrations from the notes her mother had just played. Then, she signed again. "I want to feel the music. Like you do." That night, Catherine called everyone she could think of. Music teachers, specialists, doctors, anyone who might know if this was even possible. Most of them said the same thing. A profoundly deaf child learning to play piano at any real level was extremely unlikely. Some were kind about it. Others were blunt. One teacher actually laughed before apologizing and hanging up, but Catherine remembered that night on the floor, when she had found Emily pressing her hands against the piano in the darkness. Her daughter had a hunger for music that hearing loss could not destroy. If no one else would help them, Catherine would figure it out herself. The lessons began the following week. They started with something simple. Catherine would play a single note and have Emily press her hands against the piano body to feel its vibration. Then she would play a different note and ask Emily to tell her if it was higher or lower. At first, Emily guessed wrong more often than right. But she never got frustrated. She just closed her eyes, concentrated harder, and tried again. Robert built a special platform out of wood that Emily could stand on while practicing. The platform was designed to carry vibrations from the piano directly to her feet. When Catherine played, Emily could feel the music traveling up through her legs and into her chest. It was like learning a new language, one that existed not in sound, but in feeling. Weeks turned into months. Emily practiced every single day, sometimes for hours at a time. She learned to read sheet music, memorizing what each symbol meant and how it translated to finger positions on the keys. She could not hear if she played a wrong note, but she learned to feel when something was off. The vibration would be different, slightly wrong, and she would know to try again. Catherine developed a system of visual cues to help with timing and rhythm. She would tap Emily's shoulder in a steady beat or use a metronome with a flashing light. Emily learned to count silently in her head, keeping perfect time even in complete silence. Her internal clock became remarkably precise, better than many hearing musicians her mother had taught. The other children at Emily's school did not understand her obsession. During lunch breaks, while they played games and told jokes in sign language, Emily would sit alone and practice finger movements on the tabletop. Some kids thought she was strange. A few were openly mean about it, signing insults when teachers were not looking. "Why do you even try?" one boy signed to her one day. "You cannot hear. Piano is stupid for you." Emily looked at him calmly and signed back. Beethoven was deaf. He made the most beautiful music in history. She had learned about Beethoven from her mother. The great composer had lost his hearing as an adult and continued to write symphonies that moved people to tears. He would press his ear against the piano or hold a wooden stick in his teeth that touched the instrument, feeling the vibrations travel through bone. Emily was not alone in her silent world. Others had walked this path before her. By the time she was 10, Emily could play simple pieces from memory. Her technique was not perfect, but there was something in her playing that caught people's attention. She performed at a school recital, her first time playing in front of an audience. Catherine sat in the front row with tears streaming down her face as her daughter's fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace. The applause came, though Emily could not hear it. What she felt instead was the vibration of dozens of hands clapping together. A wave of feeling that washed over her from the audience. She smiled for the first time in what felt like forever, but not everyone was impressed. After the recital, Emily overheard two parents talking near the exit. She could not hear their words, but she could read their lips clearly. "It is sweet," one woman said, "but she will never be a real musician. Not like this." Emily pretended she had not seen. She walked past them with her head held high, her mother's hand warm in hers. That night, she practiced for 4 hours straight, until her fingers ached and her eyes burned from exhaustion. She would prove them wrong, all of them. The years that followed were filled with endless practice and slow but steady progress. Emily learned to visualize music in her mind, imagining each note as a color or a shape. Low notes were deep blue, heavy and round. High notes were bright yellow, sharp and quick. Chords became paintings in her imagination, complex mixtures of hue and light that she could see even though she could not hear. Catherine found a piano teacher willing to work with Emily, an elderly woman named Dorothy who had taught music for over 50 years. Dorothy was patient and creative, never treating Emily's deafness as a limitation, but as a different way of experiencing music. She taught Emily about the emotional heart of each piece, the story behind the notes, the feeling the composer wanted to share. At 12 years old, Emily performed Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major at a regional youth competition. The judges did not know she was deaf until after they had already given her second place. When they found out, their expressions changed from professional politeness to genuine amazement. One judge approached Catherine afterward. "I have been judging competitions for 20 years, he said. "I have never seen anything like your daughter." By 15, Emily had moved on to Beethoven. It felt right somehow, playing the music of a man who had known her silence. She spent months on the Moonlight Sonata, practicing each movement until she could feel it flowing through her body like breath. When she finally performed it at her high school's spring concert, the auditorium went completely still. She played with her eyes closed, her body swaying gently with the vibrations only she could feel. Her bare feet pressed against the wooden platform her father had built years ago, now worn smooth from countless hours of practice. Every note traveled through her bones, through her blood, through every fiber of her being. When she finished and opened her eyes, she saw something that needed no hearing to understand. The entire audience was on their feet. Teachers were wiping their eyes. Students who had once mocked her sat with their mouths open in disbelief. Emily stood and bowed, feeling the thunder of applause vibrate through the stage beneath her feet. She had found her way back to music, not through her ears but through something deeper. And this was only the beginning. Emily was 17 years old when she first heard about the National Youth Orchestra summer program. It was the most prestigious opportunity for young musicians in the entire country. Every year, thousands of talented teenagers auditioned for just 200 spots. Those who were accepted spent 8 weeks training with world-famous conductors and performers. Many graduates went on to study at the finest conservatories and perform in legendary concert halls. Catherine found the application on a music website and showed it to Emily one evening after dinner. She was hesitant at first, worried about setting her daughter up for disappointment, but Emily's eyes lit up the moment she read the description. This was exactly what she had been dreaming about for years. The audition process was intense. Applicants had to submit a video recording of themselves performing 2 contrasting pieces, along with a written essay about their musical journey. If they passed the first round, they would be invited to audition in person at the program's headquarters in the city. Emily spent 3 months preparing. She chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor and Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 23, known as the Appassionata. Both pieces were technically demanding and emotionally complex. She practiced until her fingers knew every note by heart, until her body could feel every phrase and dynamic shift. Without thinking, Catherine recorded the audition video on a Sunday afternoon in their living room. Emily wore a simple black dress and played barefoot on her wooden platform, just as she always did. She did not mention her deafness in the video. She wanted the judges to evaluate her playing on its own merit, without pity or prejudice. The waiting was the hardest part. Weeks went by with no response. Emily checked the mailbox every day after school, her heart pounding each time she saw an envelope that was not from the program. She tried to focus on her regular practice, but her mind kept drifting to the audition and all the ways it might have fallen short. Then one afternoon in early April, the letter arrived. Emily's hands trembled as she tore open the envelope. Her eyes scanned the words quickly, then again more slowly to make sure she understood. She had made it to the second round. They wanted her to audition in person. The celebration that night was joyful but nervous. Catherine made Emily's favorite dinner, while Robert opened a bottle of sparkling cider. They toasted to Emily's success so far and tried not to think too much about what came next. The in-person audition was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and Emily would be competing against some of the most talented young pianists in the country. The day of the audition arrived gray and rainy. Emily and Catherine took an early morning train to the city, arriving at the grand concert hall where the auditions were being held. The building was enormous and intimidating, with marble floors and high ceilings that seemed to stretch up forever. Dozens of young musicians filled the waiting area, each one looking confident and polished in ways that made Emily's stomach twist with nerves. When her name was called, Emily walked onto the stage alone. The audition room was actually a small concert hall with about 50 seats. A panel of 5 judges sat in the front row with clipboards and serious expressions. Emily set up her portable wooden platform, removed her shoes, and sat down at the beautiful grand piano that waited under the spotlight. She closed her eyes, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The Chopin came first, its sweeping melodies pouring out of the piano like water rushing over stones. Emily felt every note vibrate through her feet and up into her chest. She let her body move with the music, swaying gently as her fingers danced across the keys. The piece built to its dramatic climax, then softened into its tender conclusion. Without pausing, she transitioned into the Beethoven. The Appassionata was fierce and passionate, demanding everything she had. Her hands flew across the keyboard with precision and power. Sweat formed on her forehead, but she did not notice. She was lost in the feeling of the music, completely absorbed in the vibrations that filled her silent world. When the final chord faded, Emily opened her eyes. The judges sat in stunned silence. One woman in the center of the panel had her hand pressed over her mouth. Another was writing furiously on his clipboard. Emily stood and bowed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then came the interview portion. The judges invited Emily to sit in a chair facing them. They asked about her training, her musical influences, her goals for the future. Emily answered confidently, her voice clear even though she could not hear it herself. Catherine had helped her practice speaking for years, and Emily had become skilled at producing words she could only feel in her throat. The questions were going well until the head judge, a stern-looking man with silver hair, leaned forward and asked something that made Emily's blood run cold. "I noticed you play barefoot and use a special platform. Can you tell us why?" Emily hesitated. She had hoped this would not come up. But lying was not an option, and hiding the truth felt wrong. She took a deep breath and answered honestly, "I am deaf. I feel the music through vibrations in my feet and body. The platform helps me sense the notes more clearly." The room went completely silent. The judges exchanged glances that Emily could not quite read. The woman who had covered her mouth earlier now looked uncomfortable. The man with the clipboard stopped writing. The head judge cleared his throat. He thanked Emily for her honesty and her performance. He said they would be in touch with their decision within 2 weeks. His tone was polite but distant, like a door slowly closing. Emily knew in that moment. She could see it in their eyes. in the way they would not quite look at her anymore. The magic of her performance had been replaced by something else. Doubt, concern, pity. The rejection letter arrived 10 days later. It was formal and brief. They thanked her for auditioning and praised her obvious talent. However, they regretted to inform her that she had not been selected for the program this year. No explanation was given, no feedback on her playing, just a generic closing wish for success in her future musical endeavors. Emily read the letter 3 times before she fully understood. Then she walked to her room, closed the door, and did not come out for the rest of the day. Catherine found her later that night sitting on her bed in the darkness. Emily's eyes were dry, but her face held an expression that broke her mother's heart. It was not sadness, exactly. It was something worse. It was surrender. I called them, Catherine signed, her hands shaking slightly. I asked why you were not accepted. They said there were concerns about communication and coordination in an ensemble setting. They said they were not sure how you would work with other musicians. Emily nodded slowly. She had expected something like this. The moment they learned she was deaf, everything had changed. Her flawless performance, her years of dedicated practice, none of it mattered anymore. All they could see was what she could not do. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Emily's life. She stopped practicing. The piano sat untouched in the living room, its keys gathering dust, just like it had in those terrible months after her illness. Catherine would find Emily staring at college brochures for regular universities, programs with no music departments, paths that led away from everything she had worked toward. One night, Catherine discovered a stack of acceptance letters hidden in Emily's desk drawer. Schools offering degrees in accounting, business administration, computer science. Safe choices, practical choices. Choices that did not require anyone to believe in her. Maybe they were right, Emily signed when her mother confronted her about the letters. Maybe I have been fooling myself this whole time. Maybe a deaf girl has no place in the world of real musicians. Catherine wanted to argue. She wanted to fight back against the unfairness of it all. But looking at her daughter's tired face and empty eyes, she did not know what to say. The music had finally gone silent. And this time, Catherine was not sure it would ever come back. A full year had passed since the rejection letter arrived. Emily was 18 now, and her life looked nothing like she had once imagined. She had graduated high school with honors and enrolled in community college for a business degree. It was practical. It was safe. It was everything she had never wanted. She found a part-time job at a small community center on the edge of town. The building was old and a little run down, with peeling paint and floors that creaked with every step. Emily worked 3 afternoons a week, helping organize events and teaching basic art classes to children. She was good with kids. They did not care that she was deaf. They just liked that she smiled at them and made funny faces when they showed her their drawings. The piano in the living room back home remained untouched. Catherine had stopped asking Emily to play months ago. The silence between them on this subject had become a wall that neither knew how to climb. Robert sometimes caught Emily standing in the doorway of the living room late at night, staring at the instrument like it was a grave she could not bring herself to visit. Music still haunted her. She would see a piano in a store window and feel her chest tighten. She would watch videos of performers online, then close her laptop and sit in the darkness for hours. The hunger was still there, buried deep beneath layers of hurt and disappointment. But Emily had convinced herself that wanting something did not mean you deserved to have it. Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snow and bitter cold. The community center was hosting its annual holiday gathering for senior citizens from the neighborhood. Nearly 100 elderly guests were expected, many of whom lived alone and had nowhere else to go during the season. Emily had volunteered to help set up and serve refreshments. The event started at 4 in the afternoon. The large activity room was decorated with paper snowflakes and strings of colored lights. Long tables held plates of cookies and cups of hot chocolate. A local church choir was scheduled to perform Christmas carols, and a few volunteers had organized simple games and activities. Emily moved through the crowd with a tray of cookies, smiling at the guests, and stopping to chat with those who knew sign language. Many of the seniors had become familiar faces over the past months. There was Walter, a retired teacher who always told the same 3 jokes. There was Margaret, a tiny woman with bright white hair who knitted scarves for everyone on the staff. There was George, a former factory worker whose hands shook but whose eyes still sparkled with mischief. The choir finished their performance around 6 o'clock, and the room filled with warm applause. Emily was helping clear plates from the tables when she noticed the lights flicker overhead. A few guests looked up nervously. Someone made a joke about the old building finally giving up. Then everything went dark. The power had gone out completely. Emergency lights clicked on after a few seconds, casting dim red shadows across the room. But the heaters had stopped working, and the temperature began dropping almost immediately. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and snow fell so thick that the street lights were barely visible. The center's director, a kind woman named Patricia, quickly assessed the situation. The backup generator could only power the emergency lights and a few essential systems. Heat was not one of them. She made calls to the power company and learned that a major line had gone down. Repairs could take hours, possibly longer. The seniors began to grow anxious. Many of them had health conditions that made the cold dangerous. Some started talking about leaving, but the roads were becoming impassable. A few of the older women huddled together under borrowed coats, their faces pale with worry. Emily watched all of this unfold with a growing sense of helplessness. She wanted to do something, anything, to help these people who had become like family to her. But what could she offer? She was just a part-time worker with no special skills. Then, she saw it. In the far corner of the room, half hidden behind a stack of folding chairs, sat an old upright piano. It was dusty and probably out of tune, a forgotten piece of furniture that no one had played in years. Emily had walked past it dozens of times without giving it a second thought. Something stirred inside her, a feeling she had buried so deep she almost did not recognize it anymore. Her feet carried her toward the piano before her mind could object. She pushed aside the chairs and ran her hand across the wooden surface, feeling the familiar grain beneath her fingertips. The room was cold and dark and filled with frightened people. Emily had not played in over a year. She had told herself that chapter of her life was closed forever. But standing there with her hand on that old piano, she realized the music had never really left her. It had just been waiting. She sat down on the worn bench and removed her shoes. The floor was cold against her bare feet, but she barely noticed. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling their weight and texture. Then she closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata rose into the darkness. Emily could not hear them, but she felt them travel through the piano and into her body. The vibrations moved up through her feet, through her legs, through her spine, until her entire being hummed with the music she was creating. The room fell completely silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Every person in that dim, emergency-lit room turned to watch the young woman at the piano, her body swaying gently as her fingers danced across the keys. Emily played from memory, from feeling, from somewhere deep in her soul that she had tried so hard to forget. She moved through the Moonlight Sonata and into Debussy's Clair de Lune. Then she played pieces she had composed herself during those long years of practice, melodies that existed nowhere else in the world. Time lost all meaning. The cold faded into the background. The darkness became a comfort rather than a threat. There was only the music, vibrating through the old piano and the wooden floor and the hearts of everyone present. When Emily finally lifted her hands from the keys, she was not sure how long she had been playing. 20 minutes? An hour? She opened her eyes slowly, almost afraid of what she might see. Every single person in the room was staring at her. Margaret had tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Walter sat frozen, with his mouth hanging open. George was gripping the edge of his table so hard his knuckles had turned white. Patricia stood near the door, with both hands pressed against her heart. Then the applause began. It started slowly, just a few hands clapping together. But it built quickly, growing louder and stronger, until the entire room thundered with it. Emily could not hear the sound, but she felt it. The vibrations of 100 pairs of hands, celebrating what she had just done, crashed over her like a wave. She stood and bowed, her eyes blurring with tears she could not hold back. For the first time in over a year, she did not feel broken, or rejected, or worthless. She felt exactly like what she was. A musician. What Emily did not know was that someone had been recording. A young volunteer named Thomas had pulled out his phone when the music started and captured the entire performance. The video showed Emily playing in the dim emergency lighting, her face peaceful and focused, completely lost in a world of vibrations only she could feel. Thomas posted the video online that night with a simple caption: "Deaf pianist plays during blackout. Brings entire room to tears." By morning, the video had been viewed 2 million times. By the end of the week, it had reached 50 million. News stations called the community center, asking for interviews. Journalists wrote articles about the mysterious deaf girl who had turned a crisis into a concert. Social media exploded with comments from people all over the world who had been moved by what they saw. Emily woke up that next morning to find her mother sitting on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, tears running down her face. "The whole world is watching," Catherine signed with trembling hands. "They finally see what I have always seen." Emily took the phone and watched the video of herself playing in the darkness. She watched the faces of the seniors transform from fear to wonder. She watched her own body sway with music she could not hear but had never stopped feeling. The world had found her. And this time, they were not looking away. The phone calls started coming before Emily had even finished her breakfast that first morning. Television producers, newspaper reporters, podcast hosts, everyone wanted to talk to the deaf girl who had played piano in the darkness. Catherine answered most of them, while Emily sat at the kitchen table, overwhelmed and unsure how to feel about any of it. Within 3 days, Emily had appeared on 2 local news programs and given interviews to half a dozen online publications. The story spread faster than anyone could have predicted. A deaf pianist who learned to feel music through vibrations. A girl who had been rejected by the prestigious National Youth Orchestra. A young woman who had given up on her dreams only to rediscover them during a winter storm. People loved it. They shared the video with friends and family. They wrote comments describing how it had made them cry or inspired them to pick up instruments they had abandoned years ago. Schools started showing it in classrooms as an example of perseverance. Disability advocacy groups celebrated Emily as proof that limitations exist only in the minds of those who create them. The offers began arriving within the first week. Recording studios wanted to sign her. Concert halls invited her to perform. Talk shows flew her across the country to share her story with millions of viewers. Emily went from being an unknown community college student to a national sensation almost overnight. But the offer that changed everything came from the last place Emily expected. 2 weeks after the video went viral, a letter arrived at the house on Maple Street. It was from the National Youth Orchestra, the same program that had rejected her just over a year ago. The letter was signed by the head judge himself, the silver-haired man who had looked away when Emily revealed her deafness. The letter was long and carefully worded. It expressed deep regret for the decision that had been made. It acknowledged that Emily's talent had been obvious during her audition, and that concerns about her deafness had unfairly overshadowed her abilities. The program was extending a special invitation for Emily to join their summer session as a featured performer, not just a participant. Emily read the letter twice before setting it down on the kitchen table. Catherine watched her daughter's face, trying to read the emotions passing across it. She expected anger or perhaps bitter satisfaction. What she saw instead was something quieter and more complicated. "They only want me now because I am famous," Emily signed slowly. Not because they believe in me, because I can bring them attention. Catherine nodded. She had thought the same thing herself. What do you want to do? Emily sat with the question for a long moment. A year ago, this invitation would have meant everything to her. She would have accepted it without hesitation, grateful for the second chance. But she was not the same person she had been a year ago. The rejection had broken something inside her. And the experience at the community center had rebuilt it into something new and different. She picked up a pen and wrote her response on the back of the letter itself. 2 sentences, polite but firm. Thank you for your invitation. I respectfully decline. Catherine mailed the letter the next day. Emily never regretted the decision. The months that followed were a whirlwind of new experiences. Emily performed at concert halls she had only dreamed of visiting. She played for audiences of thousands who rose to their feet before she had even finished the final note. She appeared on magazine covers and was interviewed by journalists from countries she could not find on a map. But fame was never what Emily wanted. The attention was flattering, sometimes even exciting, but it was not why she played. Music had always been about something deeper for her. Something that had nothing to do with applause or recognition. She needed to find a way to make her success mean something beyond herself. The idea came to her during a visit to her old school for the deaf. Emily had been invited to speak to the students and perform a short concert. As she looked out at the young faces watching her with wide eyes, she remembered what it had felt like to be in their position. Isolated, doubted, told that certain dreams were not meant for people like them. After the performance, a small girl approached Emily with tears in her eyes. She was maybe 8 or 9 years old, with curly brown hair and hearing aids in both ears. She signed a question that hit Emily like a punch to the chest. Can someone like me really learn to play music? Emily knelt down so she was at eye level with the girl. She took her small hands and placed them flat against the piano, just as her own mother had done so many years ago. Feel that? Emily signed. That is music. You do not need to hear it. You just need to feel it. And I am going to teach you how. That conversation planted a seed that grew into Emily's greatest achievement. 6 months later, she announced the opening of the Silent Note Academy, a music school designed specifically for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. The school would teach students to experience music through vibration, movement, and visual learning, the same methods Emily had developed with her mother over years of practice. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from around the world. Famous musicians offered to teach masterclasses. Families traveled from distant countries to enroll their children. Within its first year, the Silent Note Academy had over 200 students and a waiting list of hundreds more. Emily taught classes herself whenever her performance schedule allowed. She loved watching her students discover what she had discovered so many years ago: that music was not about sound. It was about connection. It was about emotion. It was about expressing something that words could never capture. Today, Emily performs in the greatest concert halls on every continent. She always plays barefoot, standing on a specially designed platform that carries vibrations from the piano directly into her body. Her performances have been described as transcendent, emotional, and unlike anything audiences have ever experienced. Critics who once doubted whether a deaf person could truly be a musician now write glowing reviews of her concerts. The same institutions that rejected her now compete for the honor of hosting her performances. But Emily does not play for critics or institutions. She plays for the little girl she once was, crying in the darkness with her hands pressed against a piano she thought she would never understand. In interviews, journalists always ask the same question: what is it like to perform without hearing your own music? Emily's answer has become famous, quoted in articles and printed on posters in music classrooms around the world. I hear every note, she signs, her hands moving with the same grace that flows through her piano playing. Just not with my ears. I hear with my fingertips. I hear with my feet on the wooden stage. I hear with my chest when the low notes make my whole body vibrate. Honestly, I think I hear more than most people ever will. Because I do not just listen to music. I feel it in my bones. The house on Maple Street is quiet now. Catherine and Robert still live there, though the rooms feel emptier with Emily traveling so much. But sometimes, when their daughter comes home to visit, the old magic returns. Emily sits at the same piano where she first learned to feel music, and she plays for an audience of two, the parents who never stopped believing in her. On those evenings, Catherine closes her eyes and listens to her daughter play. She thinks about the frightened little girl who lost her hearing, the determined child who refused to give up, the heartbroken teenager who almost walked away from everything. And she thinks about the woman Emily has become, someone who turned her greatest limitation into her greatest gift. The girl who could not hear taught the world to truly listen. And her music, felt rather than heard, continues to echo in the hearts of everyone who experiences it. Some stories end with applause. This one ends with something better, silence filled with meaning, and a gift that will never stop giving.